Greetings and welcome back to the studio. I hope some of you remember this little project that I started, I would imagine 6 months ago, since there's 6 blocks. It's my Christmas tree skirt, the Winter Wonderland tree skirt from Elementz, Applique Elementz. And it's time to get it on the frame. So this required a little bit of studying and learning on my part. This is a circle. Never sewed or quilted a circle before, so I'm going to go over some of the steps that I'm going to be employing to effectively quilt this round project. First of all, I measured the length and width. As it is a circle, of course the length and width should be the same measurement. In this case it is 54 inches, as it was designed to be. So what I've done is create a backing that is square, because I can't load a round backing fabric to the frame. There's nothing to pin it to. So we have a square, and I've gone ahead and added my extra on the sides and back to accommodate the frame. So I assumed that this was a 54-inch square, and so I've added 12 inches, which is 6 on both sides and 6 on the top and bottom. That's how I derived the measurement for my backing fabric. The backing fabric is loaded on the frame, and I have the batting basted to the top, and it's ready to go. So I'm going to go ahead and get this over onto the frame, but I'm going to tell you a couple things about what I'm going to do. First, I've put a little pin here on this center seam, and this is going to be my top. When I get to the bottom, I want any easing I need to do to have that open slit from the tree skirt to be able to ease it one way or the other. I am going to be floating this quilt because there would be no way to pin it to anything, again because it's round. So I'm going to go ahead and use this seam line to line up with the center markings on my frame. That's number one. Number two, I'm going to be employing a temporary spray adhesive. After I get this positioned on the quilt, I'm going to flip it back and put a little bit of temporary spray adhesive either on the batting or on the quilt itself, and smooth it out and let it get stuck to the batting. And then as I go down the sides, I will continue to add some of that temporary spray adhesive, especially on the edges, these bias edges, and in the center where the center circle is. I'm going to make sure that I get those areas so that I have a little bit extra gripping help on these bias edges. And I want to try and handle this as little as possible for that very reason, because all these round edges are biased and we don't want it to stretch out. After I get it smoothed out onto the batting, then I'm going to go ahead and use my basting function on the Bernina and baste the perimeter of the circle and the center as it's exposed to the head of the machine. As I move down, I will continue to baste and baste and baste, making sure that we're flat. And if there's any overlap or gap in that bottom section where it's split, I'm going to go ahead and accommodate that, because I can always cut it again later if it overlaps just a little bit. Then I'm going to load a pantograph onto the machine. Again, I'm going to be taking the longest measurement of the length and width of the quilt and create a square pantograph, as you will see in the program. But then I'm going to use a clipping block to create just the circular design element that I need and panto within that circular element. So we're going to go through the steps on that, and then hopefully we can get this quilted and off the frame in time for Christmas. Now I'm really kidding myself, because this has got a lot of binding on it, so I don't really think it's going to be finished for Christmas. Plus I didn't even put up a tree this year, but let's not go there. But at least it will be a finished top, and what I started this year will have gotten finished. So let's get over to the machine. No snickering in the background, and we will get this positioned, sprayed, basted, and onto the stitching. I already have my IntelliQuilter on and the Bernina on. I'm going to go ahead, I have my center mark here on the quilt. I can see where the seam is on my batting, and I'm going to use that to position my quilt top. Again, because this is split, I want to be able to have ease there on that side. That's how I chose to determine how to put this on the quilt. I want this as smooth as possible. Now I'm going to go and flip back the tree skirt and use some 505 on the batting. I'm going to move the head of my machine out of the way so it doesn't pick up any temporary spray. I'm going to spray a little bit on the quilt itself, and then I'm going to lay it flat and really kind of smooth it out so that it gets stuck to the batting. After I get this done, I'm going to go ahead and use my basting function, and I might even use a ruler to help me get the edge of the quilt really nicely with the basting function. I have my ruler base on, and I'm just going to use one of the large curve rulers that I have from Quilters Apothecary, and I don't need that to be the same radius as the curve of the tree skirt. It just, the curve will help me to keep the foot on the edge of the quilt. I can always just rotate the curve ruler to get that foot where I need it. I have my machine on its basting function, and so I'm just going to slowly baste around the edge of the quilt. When I need to reposition, I'll just stop and start again. And my bobbin threads come out of the bobbin case, which happens sometimes when I overfill it. So I'm going to reload the bobbin into the bobbin case and continue on this curve on both sides, doing all of the available space with basting. I've done the left half of the circle. Now I'm going to continue to do the right half. Basting the edge will help prevent the foot from going underneath the edge of the quilt and folding it over. It also keeps the whole center flat. I know that the back was smooth, so I'm not worried about a wrinkle yet, but I always myself do my basting for the edges before I add any side tension, so that when I do add the tension, everything gets pulled gently flat. And another thing that I've seen recently on the comment boards, which everybody has their own method of doing something, so it's just sometimes entertaining to see what people's opinion are of something. But they were saying, when you're doing your side tension, do you add the backing only in the side tension, or do you do batting and backing, or do you do top batting and backing? Well, the top wouldn't be that far over. A lot of people said they only do the back. They only add tension to the back, never to the batting, because there would be no point. Adding side tension does help prevent wrinkles in the back of the quilt. But I also have seen wrinkles in the batting, which is why I include both the backing and the batting when I pin, as you have seen before. And I want both the batting and backing to be smooth. And every time I roll up the quilt, I pull the backing to make sure it's flat, and then I will smooth the batting to make sure it's flat as well, and then pin the two, because I don't want any wrinkles on either layer. I know some people won't agree with that, and that's totally fine with me, but I like to make sure that everything is smooth and under tension. I'm not pulling so tight that I'm distorting the batting. It just helps, in my mind, keep everything smooth and straight. So, to each his own. Ellie Sienkiewicz used to always say, your way is the right way, because that's the way that things get finished, is your way. So this is my way, and I've got the side top here basted. So now I can go ahead and add my tension and start getting my panto pattern loaded. And because the panto always maps out from your starting position, I'm going to go ahead and move the head of my machine there now so that I don't forget to do that later. Also, I'm going to go ahead and take my ruler base off because I don't need it. Well, no, I'm going to keep it on there because I'm going to keep basting the edges. So I don't need the ruler foot for that, but I'm going to go ahead and put it in the start position, and we will start programming the design. Before I start on the screen, I want to tell you how I derived at my starting point here. I measured the whole quilt. I know it's only 54 inches, but I needed to go well beyond that to create the pattern for the panto. So I measured from my center mark over to my imaginary line, and I actually made a dot on my batting. From center to here is 32 inches. So I needed to double that for the full size, so my square that I'm going to create my panto in is 64 inches. And basically the circle is just about a ½ an inch from the top. So that's going to be my starting point. When I create the panto pattern, it's going to be 64, but we'll adjust it for the size of the circle. I have my cheat sheet here with all of my steps on it because this is a new process for me. We are going to start at the main screen just as we normally would, and I'm going to hit Design Sew Quilt, Start New, and we're going to go through this routine process. I have a work in progress. Do I want to replace it? Yes. Do I want to permanently erase it? Yes. Do I want to restart my time clock? Yes. So now I'm able to tell the computer that I want to use a pantograph. So I'm going to choose pantograph and enter rectangle manually. This measurement is that imaginary block that I told you about. It's 64 inches. So I'm going to hit width 64, enter. Height 64, enter, continue. Now you can see my imaginary square, which is approximately the size of my whole backing. Now I'm going to hit finished. It's time for me to choose my panto, and I just downloaded this. This was the weekly design deal on Urban Elements this last week. It's called Merriment. So I have it here in my downloads. I'm going to go ahead and highlight it and continue, highlight it and continue. That gave me my even and odd rows. There's a little bit of a visible gap there that I don't like, so I'm going to hit gap and just go ahead and move my finger or my cursor tool on the screen until the design comes together the way I like it. I personally love how these two holly leaves perfectly couple that berry there. So I'm going to go ahead and also adjust the height. The row height showing now at 10 inches. I think I'm going to decrease it just a little bit and go to 10 inches. So I went from 12 to 10, and you can see it added additional rows to compensate. So again, I can hit finished. I'm going to agree to my continuous transition type, which means on the edges it's just going to sew a solid line in between the points. If I didn't want to do that, I could click on the plus or minus, which would allow me to go between continuous to jump stitch or to tie off. But I'm going to keep it with continuous and hit accept. Now this is the point where I'm going to alter the pattern to accommodate the tree skirt itself. So I'm going to add edit block, add block, clipping block, and it's going to ask me what I want to affect by this clipping block. I'm going to select everything. Everything's turned red, and I hit continue. Now I want to load from block catalog, and I'm going to go to my geometric. And we see here I have a circle, which is what my tree skirt is. So I'm going to hit the circle and hit continue. Here I have the option of adjusting the height and width of the tree skirt. My tree skirt is 54 inches, but I don't want to be that accurate because I know the placement of the design is not going to be that accurate. So I'm going to say 56 inches, adding 2 inches to the height and width. So I'm going to add width, calculator 56, enter, height, calculator 56, enter, and finished. I need to select move, and I'm going to move the green circle into the center. But in order to be able to see it, I have to select zoom off, and then I just am touching the screen until I can see the whole square. So again, I'm going to touch move and grab the center of that block and move it into the center of my square. Now I know that my circle is almost all the way to the top of my imaginary square line, so I've moved it as far up as I can. It's in the center because I had a square nodule there in the middle of the square block. So I know that my tree skirt is basically centered on my backing, and I can hit finished. Transition type again is continuous, which just means once it sews off of the tree skirt, off the edge, it will just continue to the next point and come back on. Now I could tie off here at every time it went off. I could clip the threads, or I could do jump stitches, but I don't want to do either. I'm just going to have it do continuous, so I'm going to hit accept. Do I want to commit? Yes. Now we can go ahead and hit finished. You see that I have my beautiful tree skirt sewing in a circle, and I'm ready to do sew quilt. Now it wants to know, just as it normally would, what's the first pattern that I'm going to be sewing, and it's that top portion. So I hit continue, sew quilt. So now it's going to move to my first spot, and I can already see that where it's starting at is not quite where I need it to be. So I'm going to go ahead and adjust, which means I may have to start over and make my circle just slightly bigger, but I am going to go ahead and do that now. I didn't actually do the whole thing over. What I did was hit realign. I knew that the starting point was already where it needed to be, so I just moved off of the edge of the quilt, and I hit the realignment and restart. So now I should be more accurately placed on the quilt, and I'm going to go ahead and add my side tension now and get started on sewing. Okay, here we are. We're going to go ahead and hit start. I've got my arms up out of the way, and I didn't have the machine on manual yet, so it's telling me I had a thread break, which I'm sure I don't. And here we go. Some of these elements are going to sew off of the tree skirt, but I'm seeing that it's following a nice curve right along the edge, so I feel confident that we will get the nice circle that we want with the design. As always, the screen is showing where the crosshairs are is where the needle is. Where the design is red is where it's already sewn. I'm happy with the size. I also chose a green thread that matches both the backing and the top. And the design is mostly a holly leaf. So I'm happy with that green. It may be a little non-traditional, but I think even the green backing was a little non-traditional. So I'm going to go ahead and let that curve sew out, and I'll let you watch. I was only able to do one row without rolling up because of the size, so I've gone ahead and advanced the quilt, realigned using one of the tips of the holly leaf that was previously sewn, and adjusting the needle position. I've got it back to my start 2 for the second row, and I'm going to hit start. And I do this all the time. I forget to select manual. So because that was basting stitches, it'll be fairly easy to pop them out. In fact, they're out. So I'm going to go back to my start position, pull up my thread, and hit start again. So now we're on to row 2. I haven't needed to baste the center yet because we haven't gotten down that far. And I'm going to go ahead and let row 2 sew out. We've got only 10 minutes left in this row, so probably about 10 or 12 minutes per row when we get to the widest section. And I'm going to go ahead and let this sew out. And I think I might even sew a little bit on a binding of a quilt I have on my sewing machine. I'm going to stay right here in the room, let that work. We're over to the right-hand side on the second row. We're going to see how close I got to the edge. I think in the future I would have made my circle maybe another inch or two bigger because we're really close to it stitching a continuous line on the curve. I do have the intention of putting a binding on this, so that will mitigate some of that stitching. But for my first attempt on a tree skirt using the IntelliQuilter and the clipping block, I'm pretty happy. But you can see now it's sewing right to the very edge. The previous one was a little bit far away, so I adjusted. When I did my alignment, I scooched it over just a little bit. Now when I advance the quilt, this time I can use the actual point on my previously sewn block to align the next section, but I'll roll it up, baste the two edges, and this time I will also baste the center to make sure that it doesn't get caught up in the stitching. Also, I could have used my cup foot, but because I'm using the ruler foot with that ruler to do my basting, the cup foot, I would have had to switch back and forth. A little too lazy for that. So I'm going to go ahead and tie this off, roll the quilt, do my realignment, and get ready for row 3. And let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. We only have 6 rows total. So row 3 is just about the middle section. I have rolled up the quilt. I have added my tension back to the sides. I have basted the edges in the center. And I've already told the IQ that I want to sew my 3rd row. So I'm going to hit sew quilt, selecting my 3rd pattern. I'm stopping to clip threads, sew quilt. I'm going to hit stop because it doesn't know that I've moved the quilt yet, so I'm going to realign. I'm going to find my little pointer stick, which is much better than my finger. On to the 2nd row, which is in the olive green, I'm going to choose one of the little holly leaf points that I've already sewn, and I'm going to move the quilt, the head of the machine, the needle, directly to that holly point that I've selected, and I'm going to hit continue and hit OK. So now it realigned the quilt and it's getting ready to go back to row 2. I want to restart, but moving the head of the machine to start position 3. I can see S3 here. So once I get that crosshair on the S3, I can go ahead and hit OK. It's letting me know that I need to put the machine back on manual, which I did. I hit start, and now it's sewing row number 3. I'm going to go ahead and clip that thread. Now I should be good for 11.5 minutes. It's going to sew all the way across of row 3. I don't have any obstacles here. I'm just going to look. Now it's getting back up to where it's going to interlock with the top pattern. I'm just going to move that out of the way. Interlocking beautiful. Now I can just let this sew for a few minutes. And once we get done with this row, we're really halfway done with this particular project. Okay, I finished that design out after I reloaded the bobbin, and the machine has stopped on its own, so I can go ahead and tie off the end and clip the threads. That's the first part. The second part is the screen's not active right now because I have to say sew quilt and select what I'm going to be working on next. But at this point, you can see now that the screen is active. I have the 3 rows that I've already sewn and my crosshair, which is the needle position. So I can move towards the center of the quilt and drop my crosshairs right on the tip of a holly leaf that I've already sewn and drop the needle. Now I'm going to release the tension on the side, unlock the 2 rollers, and advance the quilt with the needle in the quilt right at the tip of that holly leaf. Left side done. Right side done. I'm going to gently release my tension so that I don't jerk the machine. Now I'm going to roll the quilt back, slowly rolling it up. It's going to be pulling the head of the machine. This would be just the same way that I would do a paper panto. Lock the top roller, add tension to my bottom roller. I'm going to go ahead and smooth out the quilt. And I'm going to go ahead and next baste the edge of the quilt. The center's already basted, but I will come down the center line and baste this close, even though I'm going to open it back up once I make the tree skirt. And it looks like I might even lose a little bit of the hat, but the binding is going to cover that. So after I get everything back in tension, I'm going to go ahead and realign the quilt now that the quilt is rolled up to the space it needs to be. Okay, I've pulled the needle up from where I advanced the quilt. I tensioned both sides. I've basted the 2 sides. I'm going back to manual because that's where I'll need to be. And I'm going to go ahead and hit sew quilt. And it's going to start moving, not into the right place because I've advanced the quilt and it doesn't know it. So now I'm going to hit realign, and I have the 3 rows that I've already sewn. So I can choose any element that's already been stitched out on the quilt as my realignment point. And again, I'm going to touch one of the points of a holly leaf. I'm going to move the needle to the tip of that holly leaf that I've already sewn out, and I'm going to hit continue. And when I do that, the computer is going to update instantly, knowing that I've advanced the quilt, but then I'm going to have to hit stop again. See, it started moving because it was going to go back and re-sew the 3rd row. Now I want to hit restart. I have come over to my start of row 4. I hit restart, move to row 4 starting. I'm going to hit OK. it's taking my one secure stitch after it moved from the tip of the holly leaf, hit start, and now we're off and running on row 4. We have another 11.5 minutes to get to the other side, and we'll go ahead and let that one sew out. The time is going to decrease now on these last 2 rows because it's getting smaller and smaller. We're on our 6th row, which is our final row. You can see that there's a little bit of an offset here where the 2 edges met. I'm not putting that down to quilting, I'm putting it down to piecing. And when I trimmed these circles. And also that these are biased. So when I do the binding, I will just trim this to match. And again, I'm going to have to retrim this line down the center to be able to get access for the tree skirt to go on and to do my binding. So I'm back at start point for 6. This should be just a quick, well, it says 4.1 minutes for this last bit. So I'm going to hit start. And I did it again. A million times I've done it, where I forget to change from basting. The binding will catch most of that. I'm just going to leave it go. Of course, I could go back and restitch that 1.25 inches, but you can see again here where if I had made my circle maybe 1.5 inches bigger, I might have done a better job of matching it up. But when I retrim this edge, I could trim that off and catch that in the binding as well. Overall, I think the exercise turned out really good. I don't have a lot of excess stitching out here, wasting thread. Any of the batting and backing will be usable because once I trim this off, I will have those scraps left whole without stitching through it. Another great thing is that this is another project finished for the year. So I'm very happy about that. I also really love this particular design, which is called Merriment. And as I said, I bought it when it was on the weekly design deal, which I like to keep track of. If you're signed up for emails from Elementz, you'll get the weekly design deals, and there's usually either a pattern or a panto that's on sale for that week. I always add really good ones to my library at that time. We are down to 1.7 minutes. I'm thinking once we get to this part over here, the alignment's going to be much better on our circle. We really are right to the nub here on this, so when I put the binding on it, it's going to totally cover that. So this block is a really great tool for editing digital designs. You also could do a no-sew zone. The difference between a clipping block and a no-sew zone, once you create a shape with a no-sew zone, it doesn't sew inside the shape. With the clipping block, it only sews inside the shape. So we created the circle and it maintained the design inside the circle, which is what we wanted. The quilt is finished. I can go ahead and get this off the frame, do a little bit of trimming. Either yes or no, trim the circle back out and this line here. And then I can call this project finished. Hallelujah. Well, that is going to wrap up my Winter Wonderland tree skirt. You can see how much better it looks just from trimming it. The Merriment Pantograph by, I know that Patricia Ritter worked on this. It might have also been Leisha Farnsworth, but you'll have to look. I don't have that memory right off the top of my head. Beautiful holiday panto. It has the holly and the berries and some nice swirls of the wind and the winter weather. The whole piece has been trimmed. I have my opening back where it belongs. You might be able to see a little bit better on the back the quilting pattern, but true to form for me, I always use low contrast thread that matches so it doesn't make a huge mess if there's any problem, but it also looks beautiful up close. I got a little string there. So I can bring you in closer so you can see the stitching, how beautiful that is. Thanks for staying with us through the whole 6-7 months of this project while we did each of the wedges and went ahead and pieced them together and got the quilt quilted. All I have to do now is make a binding for the whole perimeter, the inner perimeter and down the 2 slits so that it can be functional as a tree skirt. But for now my project's finished. So I'm going to pull you in and let you look closer at the beautiful quilting on here. Love the swirl on here, the holly leaves. I really liked how the clipping block worked for doing this circle, and I love this color. Green's my favorite color. So the tree skirt's finished. I want to thank you for sticking with us throughout the year, and we look forward to the new year. For those of you who may not watch this when it actually airs, this is airing right about Christmas 2021, so that'll just be a reference point. But thanks for staying with us. Thanks for stopping by the studio, and we'll see you again next time.